Hello there, my friends. So I played the London effectively, and I won an award for it on chess.com. I'm a low-ranked player, and I'm learning, but I want to show you guys what I did. So this is the London. You go pawn to queen 4, or d4, as it's called. And then they do the same, and then you bring out your bishop. And this is basically the London. You bring out your bishop, the dark square bishop, the one that usually gets trapped somewhere behind the lines. If you're playing, especially, I mean, if you're playing e4, the king pawn, a lot of times the bishop will get trapped there. So you bring this thing out, and then these are typical knight moves. He's protecting his pawn, and I'm just bringing out my knight. This is also a London, very interesting, a London setup. Okay, he brings out the bishop. I'm not worried about him taking my knight because actually generally bishops are considered more valuable than knights. So if he takes the bishop, I take back with the pawn, and we, I take away his bishop pair. But I don't necessarily want to double my pawn, so I move the pawn forward, and then the queen is protecting the knight. So he takes, I take. And then he protects his center pawn, reinforces the center with the king pawn moving one space forward. I prevent his knight from coming to g4 by moving my h pawn forward one space. So instead he goes and posts his knight in a very awkward position for me. I don't want to see that knight up here that high, so not good for me. I don't really know what he's up to, so I'm going to attack his castle. I'm assuming that he's going to castle on the king side, so I move my pawn forward. This does a couple things. One, if he decides that he wants to move his pawn or his knight back to g5, he can't do it without being taken. Twice, actually, that square is covered. And the queen can't retake. And then, so he'll have to go back to f6. All right, and then I get checked by the bishop. That's very easily blocked with my pawn. This is a very typical London setup, seeing this kind of pyramid shape in the center of the board. This is your fortress, basically. And so he retreats the bishop wisely. I move my bishop to d3. Again, this is very London. This is like basically the London. This is what you want, except usually the queen's not gone at this, or the queen's not moved out at this point. Usually the knight is still there where the queen is on f3. But otherwise, this is typical, very, very classic London setup. So he retreats. And then I move my knight out, preparing to castle on either side if I wish. I'm going to assume that he's going to castle on the king side, so I'm actually going to castle on the queen side so that I can focus my attack on the king side. So that's why I move my knight to d2 and not b3, because I want my knight to be able to control several squares. I wanted to control the b3 square. I also wanted to look at the c4 and f4 squares. All right. So he castles. So I move my bishop forward to g6, threatening and pinning the knight basically to the queen. So if he moves his knight, I'm going to take his queen. So that's not a possibility for him. So he counters by threatening my bishop with the h-pawn. So I take his knight because I'm not afraid of that. Takes with the queen. And I've got my queen covered with a pawn and with a knight. So I'm very happy about that. So I'm not worried about that too much. Plus, I forced him to open up his castle a little bit. So my bishop, my remaining bishop, the white square bishop, is looking inside his castle, threatening to attack. So I move my pawn forward one more space. He takes my queen. My knight takes the queen back. He moves forward his rook pawn, the pawn in front of his rook in the f-file. I don't understand why he did this. This further weakens his castle So apparently he's just going to try to storm my castle, but I'm not even castled yet. So I'm planning, like I said, on castling on the opposite side. So I decide I'm going to reinforce my pawn on the white square. And so I do. And then he moves forward to block my further advance on his castle. So I move my bishop in because now my bishop is going to be covered by the h-pawn. And I'm looking at him straight up. There's not much he can do about it. It'll take him he'd have to move he can't threaten me really because he'd have to move the rook. There's really no way he can capture my bishop. So basically, I've kind of pinned his king in place, and his rook, I guess, is free to maneuver, but cannot be placed on the e-file. So he moves his knight because he wants to link up his rooks and get the knight out of the way. Very basic development maneuver, not a problem. I castle on the queen side. Okay, he starts to try to storm the castle by moving the b-pawn forward 2 spaces, so I do the same. And at the same time, I'm threatening his bishop. Now, he could, if he takes with the bishop or the knight, I'd take with the other pawn, and then he would get 2 pawns for the 1 attack piece I would get, which is still basically a -1. So not to his advantage, so he moves the bishop out of the way. I move my knight over to defend that area. What I'm thinking about right here is think about posting my knight, moving my knight on the next move to b3, and then from there to post it onto c5, looking at possibly trying to assault the e6 pawn and then threatening his rook. But he moves his e6 pawn to e5. So that kind of like does away with my idea for an attack. I move my rook into the e-file because if he takes my d-pawn, I'm going to take with my e-pawn, and I want to have rook in that file, which is what he does. So I take back, and now my rook is in the open file, but he brings over his second rook to be in the open file. So I take it because what I could have done, I could have taken it with the bishop. But by doing this now, I basically pinned his rook. His rook can't go anywhere. So, he can't take me back because I will take him with the bishop. And, basically all I got to do now is take my h. I would take my rook on the h1 square and move it to the the open e file. And then, it's just about game over. So he resigns, and that's the end of the game. So how many moves was that? That was 22 moves. So you can see the London can be very effective. Basically, what I don't want to do with the London is I don't want to castle on the same side as my opponent. And oftentimes the king will stay centralized, but I needed that open e-file anyway. So it turns out that castling on the queen side turned out to be the best move. All right. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll answer what I can. But like I said, I'm not a grandmaster or anything. But I think it's important for us to have conversations about chess, those of us who are not quite as advanced as others, because sometimes we can understand each other's logic. So have a great day. Hope you smash like for me because that really helps me. I'll see you on the next one.